All right, hello and welcome. So today we had a gigantic dev workshop. This is probably the most expansive and detailed dev workshop we have ever gotten, and it covers a whole lot of gigantic changes to Warframes that are coming. These are very important for the overall kind of balance of the game, and it shows some direction in what DE is likely to do in the future and what else they may be likely to change. So I think these are really important to go over, and we're going to go over them in the order they appear in the dev workshop itself, which I will link below in the description if you would like to follow along, not using my on-screen notes of the highlights of that. They also give some dev explanation as to why they chose to do certain things, which I think is a really good touch as it helps to actually evaluate the changes for what the intention was versus whether or not I think that these changes accomplish what they were intending them to. So with that, let's get started and talk about Ash. So yesterday we actually talked about this change, and basically what they're doing is they're making it so that Ash is no longer a part of his 4. He can just send his clones out unless you want to be a part of your 4, in which case you can just use your 3 and join in with your clones. That, as I stated yesterday, is a massive positive change to what Ash is capable of as a Warframe, and that is going to be absolutely fantastic when it gets into the game. They did not show that on today's stream, which showed off a lot of these changes, but I wanted to cover it again just in case anybody missed that video, and more of my thoughts on that and how it affects Ash are in yesterday's video if you want to check that out. With that, let's move on to Atlas because we have some new information. Yesterday, we did say that they are going to be looking at Atlas and Zephyr, but we have a lot more details on that stuff now. So, Atlas is getting a new mechanic called Rubble. This is potentially an incredibly powerful mechanic that I think can push Atlas to be an A-rank Warframe if it is implemented appropriately and if it is a strong thing for Atlas to be doing fairly constantly. With that, what this entails is if you kill a petrified enemy, it will either heal you or give you a temporary armor buff. Now, on stream, they addressed that the cap for how much armor this can give you is not final. I sincerely hope that the cap is going to be very, very high, maybe topping out somewhere along the lines of what a kind of mid-end strength Chroma's armor value could end up looking like. So that Atlas actually has the ability to tank significantly leveled enemies and do some significant stuff there. And along with that, at a complete face value, him being able to heal as an inherent part of his kit is a massive, massive bonus for Atlas and is a very, very good change. Landslide is changing just a wee bit. It's going to do more damage to petrified targets, and it will give you bonus rubble whenever you kill enemies that are petrified with it. And his one is also getting more base range, so that will help him with his target-to-target, like going down a hallway, punching a bunch of dudes. So that stuff is all fantastic. Petrify is his kind of big core skill now, I guess I'm going to call it, because petrifying enemies is what you're going to need to do to get your rubble, which would be, of course, your end goal. So with that, he can petrify his bulwarks and rumblers to either heal his rumblers or with the bulwark, speed up its roll into the damage and also give it significantly more health. I don't personally think his bulwark will be useful for offense, but I would love to be wrong about that with this change. And along with that, while using his 3, he can now do any of his other abilities. So that means that you're free to go on a punching spree while you're in the middle of petrifying dudes. That is incredibly, incredibly useful. The only thing that I wasn't totally sure on is whether or not this is still reducing the speed that you can walk at. I really hope it's not, as that would be slightly disappointing, but I think in general these changes are going to be very, very good. And with rumblers, so when you summon your rumblers, you become vulnerable for a second regularly. Now, that is an insta-snap on everyone around you, petrify. So all the enemies around you when you cast your 4 are instantly petrified. That is very, very good. And bonus to that, when your rumblers expire, which means whenever they would just run out of time, they are going to turn into rubble for you to put on. I can imagine a scenario because you can hit 4 again to destroy your rumblers, where at the beginning of a mission for an Atlas looks like cast 4, kill your rumblers, put on your rubble, and then get to work. And I think that is a really good kind of flow for him to be a part of. Basically, I think this Atlas rework, given the right numbers, could be super incredible for making Atlas a really well-rounded Warframe. And I didn't think I would ever really be able to say that if Petrify was mostly as is in his kit, which it actually ends up being. So that is fantastic, fantastic stuff coming for Alice. Now let's get into one of the things that people are maybe not so happy about. Actually, the next two are things that people are maybe not so happy about. Maybe they don't like this too much. Actually, the next three, really, if we're talking about. Some people are going to be upset, basically. So, Banshees, Resonating Quake, Augment. If you watched my Lazy Focus Farm video, you know that that is key to that build and key to that focus farm. With that, Resonating Quake is changing. That Augment is being completely reworked, and it's going to be called a Nuclear Quake instead. So, instead of having a Quake that gradually gets more powerful and you can just AFK and go get a sandwich while you do your focus farm, they are instead making it so you can just set a Quake down and then you can still move around and do things as Banshee. But it's not like a more powerful Quake or anything. It just has a duration, and you can just slap it down. So this actually opens up a pretty significant change to the way that you could actually play Banshee, in that given this having a good enough range, being an active Banshee would be made significantly easier. And what I mean by that is her 4 is currently a downside in every build that isn't an AFK build, because you have to sit in it, and sitting in one place is not only a vulnerability, it also means you're not doing something else, akin to the problem with Ash's 4 previously that is about to be fixed. With this Augment, you slap down a Quake, enemies are CC'd, and when enemies are CC'd, that means that you, who no longer has to sit and do the Quake, can go murder them while they're CC'd. That is an incredibly valuable thing to have on an Augment, and I think opens up a playstyle change to Banshee in general. And while I think it is important for DE to address focus farming and how super not fun it is and how it is not really viable for most players to hit their cap each day, I think this change in general is actually pretty smart and does a different thing that I think is good. And more so than that, I think it makes it so that the Augment is more of an Augment in that it's changing what the ability's purpose is, I suppose, in a good way. So that stuff, I think, ends up being very good. People are almost certainly just going to switch from the Banshee focus farm into the Equinox focus farm. Like, that's just what's going to have to happen. So if you're looking for a new focus farm once that change comes in, I have the very fast focus farm with Equinox that you would probably, you probably want to go for that now, basically. With that, let's talk about chroma changes. I think on the whole, these are positive, but they need a little more, just a little bit more to really get there. The first thing is that Spectral Stream now has no limit from your movement. Like, you can just move around, jump around, bullet jump, whatever you want while Spectral Stream is happening, and the damage gets boosted by your 3. Will that be enough that this ability is worth using? I think the answer is absolutely not. I don't think that even with boosted damage from your 3, Spectral Stream will be a thing that you will ever want to use. I just don't see it happening. 600% damage for an ability like Spectral Stream, I just don't think is enough, personally. Unless you really needed... Actually, you know what? There is one technical application, and that is if you were using it for another proc for Condition Overload, I suppose. But that, I think, is very niche. And even with that, if Chroma is using a fucking melee weapon, he has 600% damage, and enemies can't fucking survive that. And with that 600% damage that we're talking about from his Vex armor, the math on that is being changed. So for those of you that were not aware, the way that Vex armor was calculated, and the reason it did so much goddamn damage, is because it was calculated weird. And they're making it so that it's calculated like all of the other buffs in the game, basically. With that, it is going to do slightly less damage. But it is still going to be a lot of damage. It's still going to be basically the de facto best damage buff in the game. And as a bonus, your overshields are now going to count towards your armor phase of that, which is quite useful for a number of builds, specifically builds that include auger mods, if I'm remembering the set, the home name correctly. And the bonus is now going to be provided to all allies in range. That means the defensive armor buff and the damage buff. That has some applications. That has some significant good stuff applications that can happen that I'm pretty excited for. Now, the thing that I would like to see pushed on Chroma a little bit beyond this is two things. One, I think his augment for his 2, which makes his buff sticky, should also apply to his Vex armor, in that it should make both his 2 and his 3 sticky. And what I mean by that is currently what Chroma's second augment does is if you have your 2 on, say your fire aura, and an ally gets close, it will boost their health, and then they don't have to be in range anymore, they just get that buff for the duration of it. I think that that should definitely be the case for Chroma's 3. I think that making it a sticky buff is significantly more useful and is not in like any way overpowered. It just makes it so that you can actually spread out and do other things. Along with that, because a lot of what Chroma does is currently tied to him self-damaging himself, I think to make it so that that is a less required thing in order to play Chroma, I think they should really make it so that his 3 is recastable. In that you can have your buffs, and as long as you are paying attention and you're playing the game and you have the energy for it, if you're at, say, 10 seconds remaining on your Vex armor, you can be like, oh shit, hit 3 again and reset your timer. Having that recastability on Vex armor, I think, would be really valuable to Chroma, and it makes him a lot more consistent, like many of the other tanks we have in the game, like a Naros and Rhino. That stuff, I think, would be very important, and with those changes, I think the Chroma would be in a perfect spot, and it also really gives merit to his second augment, which I think doesn't really get enough credit as it stands right now. Moving on, this is probably the biggest negative that we're going to talk about, and that is Embers Change. So Embers World on Fire is getting a significant nerf, and it is like, it is a kind of nerf. In that the ability after 5 seconds is going to start charging towards a 100%. And what that is going to do is it is going to double your damage and is going to half your range and double your energy consumption. So here's the thing about that. If it was only doing... Okay, well, how do I put this? It needs that 100% extra damage in order for this change to actually do what they said and make it so that it scales to higher levels. That 100% extra damage needs to scale with power strength. It absolutely needs to scale with power strength. Because if it doesn't, this is a net loss 100% of the time for Ember. 100% of the time, this is a net loss for Ember, and it doesn't do anything to help her, it only hurts her. Because that 100% extra damage isn't going to matter to a level 100 Kuva Guardian. That's just not a thing that they are ever going to give a fuck about. That goes for level 100 Bombards, etc. They're just not going to care. Along with that, if you're reducing the range by half, the damage that you're doing needs to be extreme because Ember is not a survivable girl. She is not tough. She's got no toughness. With that, there's another potential change where along with this heat up towards using more energy and doing more damage but having less range, if they added an overheat mechanic where you were gaining damage reduction to like make it so that you are engaging more with the enemies, and at those higher levels it becomes harder to kill you when you need to get close to them to do damage. Say, giving Ember 50% damage reduction when it's at 100%, and then that is also based on power strength. There's a lot that can be done with Ember to make her more of a close-range fighter that casts, powers up over time, and then goes in, and doesn't rely on range to just kill low-level mobs. There is stuff to be done there, but I think it has to be more than this, otherwise this is just a nerf, basically. There is potential there, though. I see where they're coming from in wanting to reduce the amount of like automatic AoE farms. That's what is inspiring the Banshee change, and that is what is inspiring this change. There is a reason for it, but I agree that they should and can change it, because that's generally better for the game's health. But having something in return like we got with the Banshee change, where that augment is very valuable in the new playstyle, I think also needs to be applied to the way Embers World on Fire works. Okay, that's a lot of words. Let's move on to part 2, because we're not done yet. It's not over yet. We see you have the Ember change right there at the top again. And we can move this up. Let's talk about Gaara. So, Gaara's Mass Petrify. The wall will now health scale based on the health and shields of the enemies it glasses. So this change, it's hard to say what this will do, because it depends on how much it scales. So enemies, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware, those of you that have played Nyx especially, enemies have a hard time killing other enemies. And that remains true across pretty much all factions. If you have, say, a Charger and a Lancer try to kill each other at a very high level, it's going to take a fucking while. It's going to be a long, drawn-out, tooth and nail fight, pretty much. It takes ages because the damage that enemies do is not high for them. It's only high for us at high levels because we don't have that much health in general, a la an Ember or something along those lines. With that, if this scaling is 100% of their shields and health or better, you would only really need to get, say, 3 enemies or like 1 ancient healer with her 4 in order to make the health scale that it would go to pretty reasonable for the majority of content in the game. Whether or not it is actually going to be that remains to be seen, so on release I will of course test this and see how it is. I think there is definitely a lot of potential for this to be a thing that fixes Gaara's 4. However, I think that this will end up being too clunky and too much of a project, let's call it, for most players who just want to put a frost bubble on the objective and not fucking worry about it, which I think is a large amount of players. So, I'll have to see whenever that actually releases if that is going to be a thing. And then, let's move on to Mag. Mag is getting more buffs, thank God. So, first and foremost, and probably the most important, Mag is getting a larger energy pool. We do not know exactly how large that energy pool is going to be, but I'm very, very excited that she is finally getting that, because if there's one thing Mag does, it is spam fucking abilities. That is a thing that Mag needs to do in order to live, so having a higher energy cap is very, very good for her. Along with that, that means that she is a better candidate for quick thinking, which increases her survivability. Everything about having a larger energy pool for Mag makes her significantly better. Beyond that, Polarize. The shards that you get from polarizing their armor and shields and all that business, will now scale with strength, and the percentage of damage done to the enemy now scales onto those shards. So what does that mean? That means that instead of those shards being absolutely, completely, and totally the fuck worthless, they now scale to what you're doing with them, which makes them incredibly, incredibly good in terms of utilization, say, with your 4, so that your 4 can actually do respectable damage. And, bonus, with her 4 now emits pulses that restore shields to the entire party as long as they are within range at every stage of Crush. So, for early game, that makes Crush significantly better and something that's actually worth casting for early game players, provided it gives over shields. That's very important, that it needs to give over shields. If it doesn't, that change ends up doing basically nothing, because especially at the higher end, fucking no one is building for shields, because it's basically a huge waste of time. So I think that this is going to help Mag a lot. If that can give over shields, it's going to be very good. And also, her Augment that gives shields, they said that would be looked at and changed, because obviously her 4 is now going to be doing the give shields thing. So that would be a little strange to have an Augment that does that for a different ability. So hopefully that Augment also becomes something fantastic, and maybe we'll even see Mag like shoot way up and be super good, like I think is going to happen for Atlas. And then let's talk about Volt as well. There's a change we've been waiting for forever. It is Discharge. Removed the damage cap. Praise the damage cap being fucking gone. No one likes that. No one likes the damage cap, and the damage was increased from 750 to 1200 at base. So, in theory, we can have good damage and also a stun. With that, the damage and stun are halved at significant range away from Volt. What that range is, we don't know yet. I'm going to have to test this significantly to see if this is actually good. That being said, Volt's stun is quite long, and as long as that does not get reduced with this, I think he will actually be a pretty good choice for crowd control in general, and may be a good choice as a DPS in certain scenarios. Time will obviously tell on that. The main problem that I see Volt still having here is that his power kit is not cohesive. In what I mean by that is that the range of discharge is not determined by duration like other abilities that work the same way, a la Nova's 4. If they did that one little change in addition, making the range of his 4 determined by duration, I think Volt would be absolutely perfect after this change goes in, and maybe even slightly OP. They might have to like duck the damage back down to 750, depending on how that actually ends up working. I think there's a ton of potential there, and it's good to see them moving forward with that change. And let's move on to the final thing. So Zephyr. Zephyr is getting way more than I expected. I did not think that they would ever completely replace an ability ever again, but they're doing it for Zephyr. And honestly, I can't not be happy about that because she needs it. Zephyr needs it. So what's going to happen here? Her 1 is now her 1 and her old 2. If you aim straight down, you're going to do Dive Bomb if you're in the air. Along with that, you can charge up your 1 to boost into the air and then hover. That is going to be pretty useful for the open world maps. You showed it in PoE, and it seemed like that would be a pretty good time and an effective way to get height on enemies and be able to do some sniper stuff. That's cool. More fun options for open world maps is going to be a thing that people are going to want / need. So I'm excited to see that. And then beyond that, we have Airburst. So Airburst was not very easy to see, as the Warframe that they were showing it off with, the Zephyr that they pulled from the community, had black energy, so it's hard to see exactly what the range of it was and stuff. But what this does is a projectile that explodes on contact with enemies and ragdolls them. So that's super good. But in addition to that, it is also going to make tornadoes bigger. So this looked a little weird on stream, because when you think about making a tornado bigger in terms of Warframe, what I think of personally is making it wider. But what this did was make it taller, which seems counterintuitive, I guess. Because in most maps, you can't go taller because that's a ceiling. So that's a weird one. I would like to see this instead make them wider, as that just makes more sense, I would say. Unless it invisibly increases the width and only visually increases the height, then that would probably be totally fine. But I just thought it was a little weird because enemies that are way up high that we can't reach are not really usually a thing. With that, Tornado has received some significant stuff. It's gotten some things. It will now spawn where you are aiming, and the closest tornado to your reticle will now follow your reticle, so you can aim it and put them where you want them. That is very, very useful. And its elemental effect, for those of you that don't know, if you shoot Zephyr's tornado with an element, it becomes that element. Something that very few people are aware of. It will now be decided by most damage of the elemental types done. So it's a lot easier to choose kind of what element it's going to be. And by shooting a tornado, you will transfer 100% of your damage to all of the enemies in the tornado. That is an incredibly good change that I think is going to make it absolutely possible for Zephyr to do some significant damage. And along with that, that means that her 4 is no longer making it really hard to hit enemies, because it's picking them up and then you just shoot the tornado to kill the guys. Like, that's a very simple one too. I think the only problem with that, it would be like an ally disconnect on allies that don't know that. So it might be slightly like of an inconvenience to them, but you can just tell them. And I think that that will be a problem that is solved over time and maybe not immediately once this change hits. So with that, that is the Dev Workshop breakdown. It is a lot of stuff. I think on the whole, this is a lot of really good stuff. And in general, there's only like a few changes that I would make here and there. Like I said, Volt stuff, like I said, Chroma stuff. I think that all of this in general is going in a direction that we as a community can appreciate, and it just needs some slight tweaks to be perfect. That being said, these changes are, of course, not in my hands yet, and when they are, I will do a full review on that update, I suppose. Until then, I will see you guys later. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you tomorrow.